The feminist movement did ultimately fail Black and brown women. And the ecofeminist movement is just one of many ways that that conversation was expanded to include intersecting identities of women.
I'm with this, rap some nonsense, and y'all get this, we'll be like.
Our simple definition of ecofeminism is recognizing that it is a framework that responds to the dual oppression of both women and nature as something that is very deeply connected, and both are deeply rooted in patriarchal systems.
Let's try it out.
I think, back in the 90s, there was this movement around colorblindness, and so, she was definitely very well-intentioned, but that really rubbed me the wrong way. And so I definitely kind of took a bad taste in my mouth since childhood around this concept of feminism. But then as I grew older, I was reading Black feminist scholars, and I was introduced to this concept of womanism. And it just felt a lot more expansive to me. And even being somebody who is a woman and is also gender expansive, I felt like I could see myself in the concept of womanism. And I really believe that that has a lot to do with it coming from the minds and the hearts and the souls of women who are not white and who do have other kinds of experiences, and so therefore can think in terms that other people who haven't had those experiences can't think in until they're exposed to them. So for me, it was really deeply personal, and it became academic after that.
Hands up, drop it. Jump out, up out. Can I get the beat up a little bit?
I was like,
yeah, up out, hey. Hey, put it in reverse.
Well, within ecofeminism, there were two terms that were created within that because of two very valid different forms of thought. So one being cultural ecofeminism and one being radical ecofeminism. So cultural ecofeminism was one that really identified that even if it is the case that we don't want to live in a world where we have this gender binary, the fact that we do have social roles that were developed as a result of patriarchy, and the fact that women have often been pressured into societal roles that connect them more deeply to things like feeding families and cleaning homes and having the resources to be able to support communities, that inherently gave women a particular relationship, women, trans folks, and femmes, a particular relationship to environmentalism. And so maybe we disagree with the conditions with which that relationship was built, right? Because we don't want to exist in a gender binary, but that movement really helped, or that version of ecofeminism really helped to appreciate that relationship that was created, whether or not people in that context wanted it to be that way or not. And then radical ecofeminism, that's where that was created after cultural ecofeminism to basically directly recognize that we can't limit ourselves in that way, right? We can't limit people to particular social roles on the basis of gender. So if any of you are particularly passionate about that, which on the basis of how many people raise their hands on ecofeminism, I definitely think it's worthwhile. There are a lot of people who would see cultural ecofeminism and radical ecofeminism as inherently conflicting. But I think that when you can contextualize the validity of both, you can see how they're really, really great resources and lenses to look at the conditions with which those lenses were created and why they do help to address certain issues, but can ultimately both be used to inform a better way that doesn't limit people to gender roles and things like that.
Yeah, so I will succinctly try to sum up my dissertation work in saying that I work with a Black nonprofit that is tied to a state historic park in California. And in doing that work, I have very much noticed the legacy continuing of Black women being the cultural preservation and knowledge keepers in our community, and wanting to keep that legacy continuing on. and specifically in relation with the state park, in which we're very much talking about historic preservation of the land and the narratives that are tied to that land, which also stem from Black farming and agriculture, and the ways in which we see that preservation happening. And I think it's so great that that can also look very different within a culture, across cultures. And for myself, I originally come from Northern Virginia, just outside of DC. My family's from North Carolina, so very deep roots in the South. And I know traditionally throughout the 16th, 17th centuries, we have a deep history of like quilting, of like your family sitting down, mostly the women in your family, and quilting as a way to preserve stories. You take cloth and pieces of clothing from people in your community, people that you're living with, and embed that into a piece. And that might get presented to a family, it might get presented to a woman who's lost her husband, it might get presented to a newborn child. And I think just ways of preserving culture in that way are really interesting to dive into, along with talking about oral traditions and oral narratives, and doing interviews with descendant community members as ways to, again, preserve the knowledge that our communities are losing with our elders passing on.
Get in there, it's your turn. All right.
Hope you're having a great day. Marine soldiers, one life seeing enemies. I tend to be a bit vicious, victorious versus my enemies. Wallflower, strong power, the observant one. My friends are never sober, so
Watch the God bless him. Watch the God bless him, man.
Yeah.
My mother is Native and my dad is white. But a lot of the knowledge that I was taught about my culture comes obviously from my mother, but it was also from my grandmother and my great-grandmother. And most of the knowledge passed down in Alaska Native cultures, not all of them, but a good portion of them is matriarchal, and a lot of that knowledge is passed down from mother to daughter and even son. But a lot of what we learn, how to gather berries, or how to make baskets or weave baskets, it's mostly taught to us by our mothers. And even all my stories were taught to me by an elder of mine, and all of it was through storytelling, where we'd sit down and she'd tell us the same stories over and over until we'd like memorized them. And so a lot of this is that a lot of the people stepping up to fight for the environment and our lands are Native women in Alaska. And at a conference I was at a few weeks ago, only 4 out of 20 of the youth there were men. And so a lot of this like knowledge and is being passed down by our elders.
Sit your ass down, it's the more to learn, it's more to handle what's behind, so humble thyself. It's like all the time, can't tell what your intention. Keep the spirit rich, that's primary mission. Like live ammunition, we can't keep it up the streets. You better stand